Hello, hey, this is Dan from Official Music Syndicate. Today I'm gonna bring you guys something a little bit different than what you're used to seeing. This is just a small tutorial about restringing a guitar. This guitar in particular, beautiful acoustic, a Martin 00015E Special Streetmaster Auditorium Acoustic Electric, all natural finish. But what I want to do first is just give you a little bit of a layout of the setup when I restring a guitar, pretty much what I have set up. So if you look here, there are two different sets of strings. To the left you have the retro strings, which in my opinion would be more geared towards a non-acoustic electric guitar, which just lucky enough for you guys, we have one of those as well. Wait for that video. And then this is a special, these are specially treated, which in my opinion will go much better with this particular guitar. Here's the guitar itself, and over here is the layout I typically have set up. Some tools may not be quite necessary, but I'll get more into detail about the tools. Just a quick layout of them. Anyhow, let's get started. What I'm going to do right quick is go ahead and strum this instrument for you and just let you get a little listen to it. Enough playing. Back to the video. Alright. So, first step, in my opinion, is action is key. When it comes to playing an instrument, especially a guitar, obviously a guitar, is the action on the guitar. And what you want is the perfect action, right? Everybody wants something that feels good and plays right. What I have is this feeler gauge here, and this setting I have is generally a perfect action for me personally. Some people like their action a bit higher, some a little bit lower, but right here, as you can see, this instrument is still factory strong. It's not even a month old. It is at the 0.26 range, and hopefully, end result, after we restring this instrument, it goes back to that. All right. So that's what the feeler gauge is for, to test your action. Alright, a lot of people have different opinions on how to restring an instrument, a guitar in particular. Me personally, it took me a long time. I was with these guys years, played with many bands, many guitar players, a lot of them, they could play, like, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, Carlos Santana, but yet they couldn't even restring their own guitar. That's a skill every guitar player wants to have. If you're on the fly, you're playing live, etc., etc. Long story short, it's not as hard as people make it seem. So what I'm here to do is explain to you in the best way I can a simple way to restring this instrument and just pretty much make it easy for you. So, when I was restringing instruments way back when I first started playing, it wasn't as easy as it is nowadays. You couldn't just go say, hey, here's $30, Guitar Center, restring my instrument. You had to do it yourself. So, over the years, I learned a lot. What I used to do every time I would restring an instrument is I would take every single string off, not knowing that that would have an effect on the neck, unless, of course, you're doing a full setup on the instrument. And you're a true luthier and you know how to adjust the truss rod, get the perfect action on the perfect setting on the neck, etc., etc. Long story short, we're going to do this one string at a time. One string at a time. So we're going to start with the high E. I personally like starting with the high E and coming from the high E up to the low E. So what I have here is a fancy little, not really fancy, it's just a, guitar stringer, but Unbeknownst to me, it has a peg puller for acoustic guitars. I've restrung quite a few acoustics in my time, but typically I would have to use these, which I don't like using because if you take it and you mess up your plastic peg, not that they're that expensive, but it scratches it up, makes it look ugly. So fortunately for us, we do have this peg puller. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna first, one string at a time, like I said, we're gonna go ahead and down tune. We're gonna down tune this high E string. After I talked about the winder, I'm not even using it, so maybe if I used it, that might make sense. Or just break a string right in the middle of the video and, you know, makes life easier on everybody. So there we go. Alright, string, goodbye. Next step, we're gonna pull out this peg. Came right out nice and easy, if you can see. Nice little peg puller on there. Keep stuff in order. Well, typically, I would have already had these strings pulled out and lined up in order. We're going with the Lifespan SP treated for long life strings. We're gonna open up the pack here, lay them out. I like to lay them out. Different manufacturers package their strings differently. Martin, which I do not use any other acoustic string except Martin. They do it nice for you. They package them individually. It makes life easy for you. So I'm just gonna go ahead and straighten these out real quick and then we'll get started putting the first string on. Get these out in order here. Alright, so we have our first high E string. Nice, pretty, this gauge, let's see, what gauge were these here? This is a 13 to 56. Simply take it out, but what you want to look at is there's a slot in the actual peg that you want to make sure it's facing forward to lock this string down into place. String up. You just push down gently. You don't have to go crazy. You don't got to go crazy. Just make sure you line it up. And a rule of thumb I've learned over the years, wow, these really do feel specially treated, these strings. First time I've ever experienced these strings. I like them. Alright. Growing up restringing guitars, it was a pain in the neck because I never knew how much slack to leave on the end of a guitar string when I was trying to string it up. But I've learned a nice little neat tip is from the end, you just go 2 pegs and that should give you just enough slack to where you're not wrapping up too much, because I don't know if anybody out there has ever restrung their own guitar and had way too much extra slack to where they're like, oh man, they have to do the whole process, clip it, etc. Long story short, use about 2 pegs. Go about 2 pegs and you should be good. And hence where our cutters come in. Go ahead and go about 2. You can give yourself a little extra slack just in case, you know, you have dyslexia or something and you string the guitar the wrong way, string the string the wrong way. You got a little extra slack to play with. Go a little over 2 peg length. Go ahead and clip that baby. And, you know, I'm not going to be like all them other guys. Yeah, clearly that's sharp. Don't poke yourself. Duh. Anyway, alright, here you go. You want to line it up. Get this facing forward, or have it pretty much lined up with the neck of the guitar. You're going to go ahead and feed it through. If the blind guy could see, he'd get it fed through. Alright, then you're going to honestly, this is the hardest part, making sure you get your rep the correct direction, because it does matter. I've seen many people restring a guitar coming off the opposite end, but it has a huge effect on the tone, on keeping this guitar in tune. So you want to put a little fold in it, and then make sure you get the correct wrap. Now take your time, you know, there's no rush involved when restringing a guitar unless you're doing it live, and at that point, you know, you're only going to be doing one, not the entire set, so don't worry about it. So you take it and you want to wrap it around. Wrap it around. Another thing while I do this is what you want to do is be very, very careful, especially with an instrument with this type of finish, is watch the end of the string that you're stringing up. You do not want that to scratch up your headstock, so definitely be careful of that. I think we're good here. Let me tighten this up a bit for us. And once I get it tight, you know, get a bit of tension on it, then I'll pull it back a bit and hold on to it that way, and make sure, like I said, this is very important for, you know, the cosmetics of the guitar. You want to make sure you have that little bit of extra slack of the guitar string up so it doesn't scratch up your headstock. Just go ahead and tighten her up. Now there's other methods where you can lock them and flip them around and stuff, but I've strung plenty of guitars, and with this method, as long as you get a good wind on it, you're gonna stay in tune. That is, if the peg don't pop out, but this is typical with acoustic guitars. We probably should have did an electric restringing first. They're a bit easier, but no problem. We're good to go. Let's just continue here. Let me get this going. This isn't the prettiest wind I've ever had, but honestly, because of the instrument I'm restringing right here, I'm being a bit more careful about scratching the headstock as opposed to, you know, getting the perfect wind here. I'll get this clipped off as soon as we get in tune. And important thing is keep the rest of the guitar in tune. Do not loosen the strings. Leave the rest of the instrument in tune as it is, so it has no effect on the rest of the instrument, the neck in particular. And you simply take your clip-on tuner, and an important thing is when you're checking the tune of the string you just strung, you want to have it in playing position. Don't try and tune it laying down. You guys probably can't see that. Let me see. Well, I'm not gonna be able to tune it while I do that, but at any rate, bring it up to pitch. Bring this string up to pitch. That's in pitch. And then the next step here would be to stretch the string out a bit. push down on the peg. You don't gotta muscle it up, just push down on the peg. Wow, that action's a bit lower already. It's gonna play like butter. And even back in the day, this is a lesson I learned. You want to stretch your strings out a little bit. So you hold on to your 3rd fret, pull up a little bit. Go down to your 5th fret, pull up a little bit. Pull up on your 12th fret a little bit. And repeat the process once or twice. You don't gotta go crazy, because if you know anything about guitar strings, they take a bit to settle in. And go ahead and recheck your tune. Ah, look at that. Still in perfect pitch after being stretched. Okay, next string. Pretty much the same process, except for this time I'll try not to break the string. So you just want to go ahead and repeat the process. Funny thing, I see a lot of these guys, I've watched a few videos of people restringing guitars, and they use drills with this tool on the end of it. Yeah, I see where it will make things faster. However, the smallest, inconsistency of your trigger finger could cause a bit of damage to the instrument. So I see no point in using a drill when you do this. So I'm just going to loosen this guy up. Continue. Moving on. Now some people like to clip their string here, which is fine when you're playing, when you're restringing a player where you don't care about the cosmetics of it. But like I said, this is a beautiful guitar, and I do not want to put a single nick or scratch in it, so I'm not going to do it that way today, guys. We'll do a video restringing a player, and then you could be a bit more rough with it, but I'm taking my time, and I want to be extra special careful. The finish on this guitar is absolutely stunning, and I do not want to see a single nick in the headstock. So how I'm going to do it here is I'm going to just take my time, unwind it like this, get this out of the way. See, boom, no scratch whatsoever in the headstock. I fold this up here. We'll clip them off at the end, but anyway, alright, let's get back to the tool. Once again, beautiful guitar. You don't want to use the needle nose. We're going to use this peg remover. Pegs out. Let's go ahead and put your string to the side. We're going to get to the next string, which, pop quiz. What's the second string up from the high E? Oh, let's see. You know why I did that? So I remember, so I don't put the wrong string on. That'd be a B string. Here's the B string. Alright, let's get this out of the way. Moving on, same process. Alright. Remember, what you want is you want to have this slot. You want to have this slot, if you could take a look at that, facing front. This supports the end of the ball, end of the string, on the acoustic, so that it holds it in place nice and tight once it's wound up around the peg. So we'll go ahead and put this in. You can push down, give it a bit of pressure, because as you can see, the last time I strung that one, it popped out a bit, but... And that's funny, because that was a lightest gauge string, but we're fine. And once again, you want to give yourself 2 peg lengths. Now, someone may have a question, well, how can I measure 2 peg lengths? Because there's only 1 peg from this peg to the next peg. All you got to do is use your fingers, estimate it, come up here, come from the top peg. Once again, give yourself a bit of extra slack, and then clip that baby, and then move on. Probably should have lined this up, but it's okay, you know. We're lined up now. Go ahead and feed it through the peg. Give it a bit of a bend. And you're gonna wrap around. And the important thing is like I said, you've got to have the string coming off the left side because of the tension of the neck, the fact of keeping it in tune. That's very important. You want to make sure you have it coming off when you're wrapping the direct side that it's supposed to be. So let me wrap this up a little bit by hand first, and then we'll get back to our fancy little tool. I'm sure it's fancy nowadays. When I was coming up, that was a fancy thing, but you know, got a little bit of extra slack on this one. We're gonna go ahead and wind it up. Get to my tool here. And once again, same situation. When you're tuning up, you want to pull it up into playing position. Oh, and another thing I learned is when you're tuning your guitar, it does make a difference. It doesn't sound like it might, but see how that's low pitch? You always want to tune up into your pitch as opposed to being high and then going low. Trust me, it definitely stays in tune better when you come up into pitch. And same thing with this string, we're going to stretch it out a bit. Second, third, fifth, stretch her out a little bit. Make sure this peg is nice and solid in there. Definitely want to push down on it. A little bit different than a bridge on an electric guitar. Alright, that's 2 down. How many more to go, children? This is a 6 string, not a 12 string. Okay. Moving on. Getting organized here, everybody. Okay, next string is a G string. Now see, I mentioned the slot several times, and when you're putting it down into the hole, you can kind of, not too much pressure, but put a little bit of pressure on the peg and then pull up on the string. And then you'll feel that extra wound part before the ball will pull itself up into the peg. And then you can put some pressure down on it. Put some pressure down on it. That way you know that sucker's gonna stay in there. And once again, like I said, oh no, now I'm at the last peg. How am I gonna gauge this? It's easy. Take 2 pegs with your fingers. Just try and keep them even. Give yourself that slack, and then clip 2 pegs worth, and you're good to go. I think I gave myself a little bit too much slack on the last one, so I'm going to cut back a little bit. Alright, once again, line it up. The hole, what I'm talking about, line up the hole. Go ahead and feed her through. Get you a little bend. At this point, you should definitely be comfortable which way you're gonna wrap around. So you're gonna wrap around. Now see, these are wound strings. There's a difference. The other strings are the higher end strings. They don't have the extra winding on them. So what I do sometimes is I go below the initial feed and then I go above it. And that definitely adds to stability and holding it in tune. Pull back a little bit tight on it. Give it just enough to where you feel like you can, you can start tightening it up and get it in tune. And just, sometimes I push down a little bit, make sure it stays like a nice winding. Windings, they don't have to be perfect, but, OCD people like myself definitely like a nice winding on them. Just tighten her up. Yeah, this is so different from when I was younger doing this. I would have like 14.5 inches extra slack and I'm like, wow, what am I gonna do with all that? But that 2-peg tip, it's a lifesaver. Get you where you need to be. It's important to have it held straight up. Bring it up to G. I'm sorry. Moving on to the other side. Generally, acoustic headstocks are like your basic Gibson headstock, not like a Fender where they're all straight in line. So the tricky part, it's not that tricky, but you go from wrapping around one way to flipping over to the other side of the guitar, and then you got to remember to make sure you're wrapping around the correct way. It's bottom line, it's just the opposite. I think. Rinse and repeat, folks. Rinse and repeat. Could do this quicker, but like I said, keep repeating myself. Definitely don't want to scratch up your headstock, the actual peg. And once again, 2 pegs worth of slack. Now we're getting into the thicker strings. You can give yourself a little less slack, but the problem is you don't want to give yourself too little slack, because then you're blowing a string. You're gonna have to go get another set of strings, etc., etc. If you give yourself too little slack, you're gonna go ahead and try and tune that thing, and it's gonna be way too tight, and it's not gonna stay in pitch. So it's kind of like it's a bit tricky, but with practice, it ain't no thing. So I give myself just a bit less slack on this. Let me double check here. 2 pegs worth from the end of the peg. And the way that's why I love Martins. They pretty much have this, I don't know if you guys can see it. Let me show you real quick. I'm gonna snip this first. And then if you can see the wound part at the end is where the unwound part is. They basically give you the example of, let me show you up close here. Let's see if you guys can see this. Let me hold this in frame a bit better. If you can see this, if I could hold it still long enough. See the way the wound part is, it's a bit blurry, but then when the unwound part comes, that's virtually where your slack ends, and it's pretty much a signal of where you want to cut. But not just because I don't like having extra slack, especially on acoustic guitars. Now on a bass, you could have a little bit extra slack. That's not a problem. Once again, make sure your peg's solid in. This isn't the best one I've ever had on this one, but I guarantee you should stay in tune. Fold that up. You do not want to scratch this headstock. I can't keep saying that enough. Let me show you what I've been talking about this whole time. When you're winding the string, you want to come off this side. If I could point to it, you want to come off that direction, because that's, otherwise you're the opposite direction of the guitar and pitch. So that's why you want to come off that side. Alright, same thing. Alright, 2 to go. Last 2, your A and E. A bit of pressure. Once again, your 2 peg length. Now we're getting to the thickest of the thick, so you can cut back a little bit on the slack, but like I said, not too much. You don't want to cut back too much, because then you're gonna wind up having to put another string on. So we'll go ahead and take 2 peg lengths from this peg, snip it, feed it, tighten it, and everybody's like, hurry up, we want to play the thing. Line your peg up. Get your bend. When I bend it, I like to bend it and fold it up a little bit, you know. I'm gonna go 1 under on these wound strings. And come off the top, make sure you're going in the right direction. And just go ahead and tighten her up. Tighten. I have a little bit more slack than we need, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes, don't worry about it. It might seem like you have too much slack, but the strings expand and tighten back up, and you know, once you tighten it and pull it into pitch, it might look like there's way too much slack on it, but once you start tuning it up, it'll settle right into place. As long as you're not going over the top of the peg, you should be fine. Down on this a bit. Actually, you know what, guys? We're gonna take a little slack off this one. That's a bit too much for this string. I'm just gonna cut off where I added the pull or the bend. It's a bit too much slack here on this one. I'll straighten it out a bit. And put this baby back through. Who would have ever thought restringing a guitar would make you sweat? There we go. That's much better. Yeah, you don't want to come up over the top of the peg. That's, you know, definitely not going to stay in tune that way. I like to push down a little bit on here and hold it in the nut. This one overwrapped a bit, but it shouldn't be an issue. Alright, who wants to bet that's an A? Not me. Ah, yeah. Same thing again, stretch them out. Make sure the peg's nice in there tight. Last string, or low E, and then you will have this nice, beautiful Martin restring. I think I got a better winding on this baby than the factory winding. No offense, Martin, but hey, factories are factories. They probably had a robot do it, I'm sure. If they with the slots, and especially when you're tuning, I probably should have brought this up before I did the first string. Make sure, you know, you're nice in line with your nut. And same process. Your 2-peg cut. I'm gonna definitely go back a little bit more because of the thickness of this. The tip I learned was to go 2 pegs, but as the thicker the strings get, I tend to cut back a little bit more, because the thicker the string is, clearly it's gonna have a little bit more girth to it on the peg. So I definitely go back a little bit more. We're gonna go 2 pegs. Go about a 1.5 on this one. I'm gonna cut this right about there. Get that out of the way. It's gonna go nice and lined up. Give your bend on it. Go ahead and wrap her up. Now with this one's a bit thicker, so I may actually wind up going back. Hold it firm into the nut, and I'm gonna actually use my winder on this one. Stretch it out. 3rd, 5th, 12th. Rule of thumb. Stretch it out. Just for fun's sake, let's see. Pretty close. Let's tune her up. while you're tuning, once again, I'll say it again, you want to tune up into pitch, never go back down. All guitar strings can be finicky when they're first put on until they stretch and get accustomed to the neck and the rest of the body of the guitar. But that's especially why it's important to stretch them out a bit, but so far so good here. Aha, listen to that. And that's how I restring a guitar. I hope you guys learned something from it. What we're gonna do is next time we're gonna come at you is gonna be the full body Dreadnought Martin acoustic, and that is not an electric acoustic, is why I chose these strings to go onto that. But we're gonna go ahead and put the retro strings on the Martin acoustic and see how that sounds. And next, we'll keep going on. We'll do an electric. We'll do a bass. We'll do a ukulele. Hey, a classical. Classicals are fun. They're not really fun. One thing we won't do, guys, is a Floyd tremolo system guitar. I'll leave that up to somebody else. But for now, I hope you guys learned a little something. This is once again Dan from Official Music Syndicate. And that is how I restring a guitar.